How Lesbians Think opens with what appears to be a simple workplace misunderstanding, but unfolds into a striking meditation on identity, perception, and the quiet, complex ways queer women navigate power and vulnerability. The film begins with Sovereign nervously approaching the office of her new boss, Jade, the company's freshly appointed CEO, and even in those first few moments, the emotional current is clear. The hesitation in Sovereign's knock is more than professional nervousness. It's the apprehension of a queer woman entering a space not built for her voice. Jade, charismatic and brimming with the kind of confidence that can only come from someone used to being listened to, invites her in with energy that feels both welcoming and slightly overwhelming. There's a dynamic instantly set. Sovereign is grounded, thoughtful, careful with her words, while Jade is expressive, idealistic, eager to innovate. When Sovereign begins to share her concerns about Jade's new advertising approach, what could have been a dry corporate conversation becomes a microcosm of how queer perspectives are often misunderstood or invisibilized in professional spaces. Jade's plan to include more men in the company's ad seems like a progressive, inclusive idea from her vantage point, but Sovereign knows the truth of their audience, that their brand strength comes from being rooted in the lesbian community, a demographic often erased or misrepresented in mainstream media. When Sovereign delicately reveals that their customers are mostly lesbians, there's a profound moment of reversal. The confident CEO is suddenly confronted with her own blind spot, and the power dynamic shifts. For the first time, Jade must listen, not lead. This moment encapsulates something deeply familiar to queer women, the exhaustion of having to explain one's existence to those in charge, but also the quiet satisfaction of finally being heard. When Sovereign admits that she herself is a lesbian, the scene deepens emotionally. Her coming out in the office, even in such a seemingly casual context, carries a lifetime's worth of coded meaning. It's an act of trust, vulnerability, and subtle rebellion. She doesn't owe this information to Jade or the company, but by sharing it, she takes control of the narrative, ensuring that the conversation about representation is grounded in lived experience, not theory. Jade's reaction, initially comedic in its wide-eyed realization, soon turns introspective. The film uses her shock not to mock ignorance, but to highlight how society trains people to view queerness as something niche or external, rather than human and ever-present. Jade's evolution in this scene, from misunderstanding to genuine curiosity, mirrors the broader process many non-queer people undergo when they're finally confronted with the depth and reality of queer lives. It's not instantaneous enlightenment, but a moment of humility that invites growth. Sovereign's suggestion that Jade get to know their lesbian customers on a deeper level, metaphorically urging her to understand the nuances of queer identity rather than simply commodifying it, becomes a tender yet charged exchange. It's not an invitation to fantasy, but to empathy. Her phrasing is playful, perhaps even teasing, but beneath that levity is a longing for representation that feels authentic, not performative. For queer women watching, this interaction resonates because it reflects the emotional labor of having to educate those with power about the realities of their lives, often through charm, humor, and composure. It also speaks to the ever-present tension queer women feel between professionalism and authenticity, the balance between expressing truth and self-protection. When Jade responds with openness, genuinely wanting to understand, the scene subtly transforms from one of instruction to one of connection. Her curiosity is not objectifying but introspective. She realizes that understanding queer women means unlearning assumptions about love, desire, and identity. Her line about not knowing many lesbians lands like an admission of isolation, a recognition of how heteronormativity separates people not just by orientation but by empathy. Sovereign's amused but kind response bridges that gap. What follows isn't about seduction, it's about two women meeting at the intersection of misunderstanding and self-discovery. Sovereign's willingness to share her experience reflects a common queer truth, that vulnerability often becomes a tool for survival, a way to humanize oneself in systems that don't see you fully. Emotionally, the scene resonates as a metaphor for the broader cultural dynamic between queer women and the institutions that claim to support them. Jade's corporate optimism and Sovereign's grounded realism reflect two ways of navigating womanhood under patriarchy, one through the acquisition of power, the other through authenticity and emotional intelligence. When these forces collide, something transformative happens. The recognition that power without empathy is hollow, and empathy without power is unsustainable. The film invites viewers to see their conversation not as a clash, but as a meeting of mirrors. Two women, both ambitious and searching, realizing that their experiences, though different, are intertwined by the same longing to be understood. For lesbian and queer audiences, the emotional core of this scene lies in its honesty. Sovereign's mix of confidence and caution reflects what it feels like to constantly weigh the cost of self-expression. Her professionalism doesn't erase her queerness, it coexists with it, shaping how she moves, speaks, and negotiates space. For many women in male-dominated fields, queer or not, this balance feels achingly familiar. The need to present competence while managing the undercurrent of being misunderstood. Jade's transformation, meanwhile, represents the possibility of change. The idea that those in power can learn not just to tolerate difference but to embrace it as essential to progress. Symbolically, the office setting is brilliant, sterile, hierarchical, built on control. Yet within it, these two women carve out a pocket of honesty. Their conversation dismantles the myth that professionalism must be emotionless, showing instead that genuine understanding between women can thrive even in structured spaces. This challenges society's discomfort with emotional intimacy between women, especially when one holds authority over the other. Too often, women's relationships, whether romantic, platonic, or mentorship-based, are scrutinized for hints of impropriety or rivalry. But here, the film insists on another narrative, that emotional connection between women is both radical and restorative. Jade's openness and Sovereign's candor defy the expectation that women in power must compete or conceal. Instead, they create a dialogue that is both vulnerable and transformative. There's also an undercurrent of generational queerness at play. Sovereign embodies the modern, self-assured queer woman, articulate, self-aware, unafraid to challenge her superior. Jade, on the other hand, represents those who are still learning to name what they don't yet understand. Their exchange becomes symbolic of how queerness evolves culturally, through dialogue, exposure, and empathy. The film doesn't mock Jade's ignorance, but instead reframes it as the starting point of growth, suggesting that allyship begins not with knowledge, but with humility. As their conversation reaches its quiet resolution, the emotional resonance becomes clear. This isn't about seduction, but revelation, about how when one woman dares to speak her truth, another woman might finally begin to see herself differently too. For queer viewers, this is the essence of representation, not spectacle, but recognition. The film's title, How Lesbians Think, might seem humorous, even ironic, but its deeper meaning lies in the shared humanity beneath identity. It reminds viewers that queerness is not a mystery to be decoded, but a perspective to be respected, one that values connection, honesty, and self-discovery. The brilliance of the scene lies in how it quietly reframes power. By the end, Sovereign, once nervous, holds emotional authority, while Jade, once commanding, listens with genuine openness. This reversal doesn't diminish Jade's strength, it redefines it. True leadership, the film suggests, comes from listening, not dictating. And true representation comes from collaboration, not assumption. For women and LGBTQ+ audiences alike, the message is empowering, that understanding begins with courage. The courage to speak, to listen, to admit what we don't know. Ultimately, How Lesbians Think isn't a story about attraction, it's about awakening, both personal and collective. It captures the nuanced emotional intelligence that queer women bring to spaces that often misunderstand them, and the quiet revolutions that occur when women see each other not as roles, boss and employee, insider and outsider, but as human beings capable of transformation. In its gentle humor and emotional honesty, the film becomes not just a commentary on queer visibility, but a love letter to communication itself, the kind that builds bridges, shifts perspectives, and in small but powerful ways changes the world.